Green is the color du jour today, evidently. Even Mary Lynn's shoes. Rocking the kicks. Good morning. I am so happy to be here. I love you. We're talking about vulnerability this month, okay? So I love you. I was seeing somebody once, and I thought it was getting serious. And so, you get to that point where you're trying to see who's going to say I love you first. I did it. I said, I love you. And the response was, you like Thai food? Yeah, so from talking about vulnerability, I've always liked this quote, and it says, there's a saying, like pebbles in a bag, the monks polish one another. Well, the same can be said for all relationships, especially familial ones and close ones. We're talking about vulnerability, and we've had some great talks this month, and vulnerability is kind of a big buzzword du jour right now, and it's all Brené Brown's fault. She's wonderful because of her TED Talk and her books and now her Netflix special. In case you haven't seen it, it's just amazing, so I would recommend it. What are we talking about when we talk about vulnerability? The Latin root word of vulnerable is to wound, to hurt, and to wound. So, of course, who would want to be vulnerable on purpose? When you think of a public figure that's been vulnerable, maybe a celebrity or a politician, what usually happens to them is people pounce on them, they attack them, call them weak. So why would anybody want to be vulnerable? Why would anybody on purpose be vulnerable? What's the benefit of being vulnerable? If you need a lesson on vulnerability, I would suggest you upload some videos to YouTube. Has anybody done that? Well, you have back there, Randy, I know. So Brené Brown says that when her TED Talk first went viral, she did this TED Talk initially for TED Talk Houston, so she thought it was just going to be a local thing. Well, for some reason it went viral, and she had millions, and she still has hundreds of millions of views on there. But when it first came out, she made the mistake of reading, she and her husband read the comments. Well, actually, she waited till her husband left, and then she read some of the comments of the viral video where she talks about shaming and vulnerability and living with those. And she said she was reading them, and it just devastated her because they were saying things like, well, of course she's vulnerable. Just look at her. If she lost 80 pounds, or maybe if she killed herself, we'd all be better off, and just going on and on. So what did she do? Well, she did like all of us do. She dealt with it head on. She got a jar of peanut butter, smallest spoon she could find. That's my secret. And she binge watched Downton Abbey for 7 hours straight. Well, once it was over, she's like, Downton Abbey, let's see who the actors are. Oh, I wonder how much it costs to fly to London. I wonder what they eat in London. And so she's going, just anything to not have to deal with the reality of that she was really hurting. So she started to Google, I wonder who was president during Downton Abbey's time. And it turns out it was Theodore Roosevelt. So just out of curiosity, she clicked on this link, and it had a speech from Mr. Roosevelt. And this is the part that stuck out to her, where he said during his speech, he said, it's not the critic who counts. It's not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, and who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again and again, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails daring greatly. So that really spoke to her, that these critics were just tearing her apart. They were ripping her apart. Even they didn't even know her. It didn't matter. And so this helped her through that. Well, now I'm a musician, and I have over 2 million views on my YouTube channel alone. And I have a policy. I never read the comments before noon. Somehow I think that protects myself from, just in case it's negative, it's going to ruin my day. But some of the negative comments, of course, they're the ones that stand out, right? It doesn't matter to all these people, love and praise and good well-wishing. No, it's the negative ones, what I call the drive-by comments. Keep just going to the next video. So some of them are so vicious. and so like they mix their insults. They can't decide my ethnicity, so they just blanket them out. Well, my stock reply to all of them, of course, I can't take them personally. Why would I? But I always respond the exact same thing to every one of those comments. Thank you. I'm so glad you liked my video. Where can I see some of yours? I pretend everything's a compliment, in other words. That's the secret to vulnerability. But this got me thinking about what vulnerability is, and it's really only dangerous if it involves other people. So, be vulnerable in private, on your own Z's, as I say. No problem, right? As long as you aren't vulnerable around your family, or your friends, or your coworkers, or your community, or in public, or online, it's going to be just fine. Right? When I first started reading The Science of Mind a couple of decades ago, one chapter in the 1926 book, Science of Mind, caught my attention. It was a chapter that Ernest Holmes called Getting Along with People. And I read this, and I thought, wow, this guy, Ernest Holmes, he really understands what's at the crux of all human suffering. Like Sartre said, hell is other people. So this is what Ernest Holmes says in that chapter. He says, on the other hand, much of our trouble comes because of others. In our relationships with others, two things must happen if we are to be happy. We must be with others, we must enjoy them, we must act with them, but without any way seeking to control their actions. He goes on to say, this is not always the easiest thing to do, particularly with our closest friends, but you may be certain that the one who has the largest number of friends is the one who can play and work with them, while at the same time letting them alone. Move over to 2015, Brene Brown's book, Rising Strong, and she says, vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome. Vulnerability is not weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage. So they're basically saying the same things, showing up knowing that you can't control not only other people, but you can't control the circumstances that you're going to be vulnerable in. That's actually a true measure of courage. So there's this neuropsychologist named Mario Martinez. I've read a couple of his books, and this one, he says, I think this really puts it all together for me anyway. He says, the wound you choose in order to interpret your pain becomes a shield of protection against forgiving, because releasing your grudge means being vulnerable again. Vulnerability involves healing your fractured parts by merging them with the wholeness of your being. So there's an analogy of a jigsaw puzzle. Some people look at the puzzle and they say, well, the puzzle is incomplete because the pieces are all lying on the floor, but some of us know that by gathering them all together, we create the entire picture piece by piece. So in other words, putting our wholeness back together, including all of the fractured, all of the vulnerable parts. There's this part in The Science of Mind where Ernest Holmes writes, and he just can really say things in a beautiful way. He says, here is one of the keys to successful living in right relationships among people. It is only when we are whole within ourselves that we can help others. It is only when we have faith that we can instill faith. It is only when we have hope and enthusiasm that others respond to us with equal hope and enthusiasm. Few people can awaken that vulnerability within us more than our family. In fact, I don't know if you know Ram Dass, the late Ram Dass. He famously said, if you think you're so enlightened, go spend a week with your family. His name was originally Richard Alpert, and when he arrived home from India after being in the ashram and studying with gurus, when he arrived back, his father, who was he was a president of a railroad, he was a founder of Brandeis University. Well, he kind of looked at his son, and he put him in the car really quickly because here was this barefoot, long-robed hippie who was his son, and he mocked his son. He instead of calling him Ram Dass, his new name, he called him Rum Dum and Ram Dass. That's his direct quote from his book. However, when these hundreds of hippies showed up just to be in the presence of his son, he found a new sense of pride and with his son. So suffering ensues when we focus on our sorrow instead of appreciating the beauty and the richness of our complete selves. And it's that feeling of rawness that is the rawness of working with vulnerability. They often feel like they're really one and the same thing. But the challenge is to find a way to be comfortable with that innate vulnerability feeling, which is, after all, also called being human. Imagine what it would be like if we would allow our leaders to be human, to be fully human, to embrace the frailty, to have one of our leaders say, I don't know, I just don't know, but I'm going to spend time with this subject. But we don't give them the chance. We often don't give each other that chance either. But when we're moving through a vulnerability, we have to be so aware that there's something called the ego. And it really, it doesn't like to be vulnerable. In fact, it'll project this image that we're strong within ourselves, that just anything that signifies weakness, it'll try to defend itself pretty strongly. So I was thinking it either really takes courage, incredible courage, to be authentically vulnerable these days, or absolute positively not caring about anyone's opinion except your own. There's a famous quote that says, what other people think of me is none of my business. I really like that one. So what are some steps that we can take to move from vulnerability to let it help us along, to help us grow on our spiritual path, and to really embrace it as just one more teacher? Well, the first thing is to be intentional about who you accept feedback from, all right? Be intentional about who you accept feedback from. Like Brene Brown, she decided that she's just not going to read any more of those comments, and myself, I just decided that I'm not going to do that, and I'm just going to say thank you. Just imagine it's all meant as a compliment. So be intentional about who you accept feedback from. Next one is to belong to yourself first. The opposite of belonging is fitting in. True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are, but it requires you to be who you are. And that's true vulnerability, to be who you are. Gratitude. I think gratitude is, this practice, it's kind of like an inoculant against fear. I find a way to say thank you to everything, for everything, constantly. The next one is to embrace discomfort. Isn't that fun? But choose courage over comfort. But also know that your boundaries and your intuition will tell you when you're in a situation where your vulnerability won't be nurtured, where it'll be taken advantage of. So listen to that feeling. The last one is to come off the blocks. You know what that means? Come off the blocks. Show up, be seen, answer the call to courage, and come off the blocks, because you're worth it. You're worth being brave. Looking through the science of mind this past week, and I was really trying to formulate what has science of mind taught me about living with vulnerability, about moving from that vulnerability to being an empowered and authentic person. So I found these steps. The first one is to forget the past, right? Why walk around with the sticky cobwebs of the past? Let it go. Literally, figuratively, actually, however you want to say it. Let the past go. Tell a new story about yourself, a different story. Affirm that you are whole, you are healed, you are complete. And if you can't believe that just yet, then say that you are becoming whole. You are healing. You are becoming more complete every day. Because you cannot create a new reality with the same personality that got you into it. You just can't. Never has there been a more truism, in my opinion. You have to create a new personality to have that new reality. The next one is to forgive yourself. Really, really forgive yourself and everyone else for everything that has happened. I love that image of that non-forgiveness is like holding that hot coal that you're going to throw at the person who hit you. Well, who's getting burned? You are. So drop it. So forgive yourself and everyone else. The next one is try to feel and believe that everyone is doing the best they can. Who here really thinks people are, just be honest, who believes people are doing the best they can in any situation? Who believes they are not doing the best they can? sheepish hands. Brene Brown tells this story of she was doing a workshop and a class with a group of clergy down in Texas. She said it was replete with tumbleweeds. I was like, well, that's New Mexico too. But so she was down there. These were old school clergy men and women. These are the people that marry and that bury people. So they go place to place and they do what the old time pastors did. So she had them all together. And she asked them, who here believes that people are doing the best that they can? And half and half, just like it was here, kind of half and half. So she said, all right, I want you to picture someone in your mind, write their name down on this little piece of paper just for yourself, of someone you think who is not doing the best that they can. So they wrote some stuff down. And she said, all right, now picture that person and imagine that God comes right in this room and tells you, actually, that person is doing the best that they possibly can. And she said when she asked them to visualize that quite a few of them just slumped over, quite a few of them just started weeping. There was this one couple, they were both clergy. They had written down the exact same person, the exact same man. It was this man whose their family, their children had been taken away from he and his wife several times. They were always out of money. The child protective services was always over there. So they said that person came to mind because every time that we give them money, they gamble it away, and the formula that they buy, they dilute it with water. So their children kept getting taken away. And so when they said that God said to them, this person is doing the best that he possibly can. He's doing the best that he can. It said that made them both realize how much judgment in their hearts that they had been holding and not allowing him to thrive because their own judgment. And then there was a woman, and she said, my sister came to my mind because she used to be a beautiful dancer, a trained dancer, and now she works in a strip club dancing, and she brings people home at night that her two sons, that they have to see that. And she said, and I realize that she's actually doing the best that she can and that I have to quit being mad at her. I have to start loving her as best as I possibly can. So that I think is one of the hardest, is to believe that people really are doing the best that they can. We really are doing the best that we can. We just, we didn't come with handbooks and with programs and software. Realize that you're born of spirit. You're born a spirit into a physical life. Understand that, internalize that, really think about that. And get back to the center of your being and think and live and act from the point of view that you are one with everything, because you are. You are one with God. Your being vulnerable is actually pure faith and trust in that power greater than ourselves. So we have to rest in that divinity, knowing that we're limitless, we're ageless, we're deathless beings who will never be hurt or destroyed by anything that anyone can dish out at us. So by staying in that realization, we can be unmoved. And again, set those boundaries so that you know what's possible. So think about this. If other people are interfering with your being able to be completely vulnerable, then maybe you feel like you haven't received or support or joy from other people. Maybe it's because at some level we're stifling that joy and that support within ourselves towards other people. So ask yourself, do you completely support others in their vulnerability? As Ernest Holmes says, joy must go forth to meet joy. Love must go forth to meet love. So do we see every single person as a child of God? Do we let them be exactly who they are? Do we meet them where we know them to be, or do we meet them where we need them to be in order for us to feel good, to feel safe, to feel happy? So we're all rooted in God. All of us are rooted in God, in spirit, in our own connection to divinity. It is only as we go down to the roots of our being that we unify with the others. In spirit and in truth, that's where we need to meet people. And everything that follows is a play of life upon itself. That's what Ernest Holmes says. So I'm going to end with two stories, and one a quick quote by the author Mark Coleman. I absolutely love this line. It's a passage from his book, and he says, "Make your heart as vast as space, so big that nothing can harm it. When our hearts are that wide, it is as if the judgments are ripples on water, flowing away and leaving no trace. This is what vulnerability makes possible. It allows the natural strength of the heart to emerge." There's a story of one Western Lama that went to Tibet for a 3-year retreat. Oh, just a side note, I was watching CBS this morning, and there was a NASA person talking. We're actually going to send people up to Mars, okay? They're actually talking about that within a few years. So the interviewer said, well, what kind of people are going to go? And the NASA person said, oh, it's real specific. They have to have really thick skin and a long fuse. She said, if we took people off the street and put them in the thing that's the size of a camper that these people are going to live in for 3 years, they would kill each other. So they know. So this Western Lama talks about, he was in a 3-year retreat, and they were thrown together in a tiny compound, 15 of us, he says, as if we were married and dropped off in a war zone. It was intense living closely with others, rounds off your rough edges. Remember the pebbles in a bag? He says, you can't fool yourself because others see you more clearly than you allow yourself to see. It was a very bonding time in a way. Living collectively was as valuable as all of the other meditations we did. It brought alive the teachings of compassion moment to moment. And he goes on to say, now my main practice has become communion, to recognize the living spirit in everyone, in everything, not just in the peaceful people. If you look in anybody's eyes, you'll see that light shining there, but also in every animal, every leaf, every flower, every dewdrop, every clod of dirt. Because people are no more enlightened in the monasteries than out in the world. It's the same everywhere, he says. Spirituality is not about the mountaintops. It is seeing the sacred right here, right now, and celebrating and affirming that perfection every single time. Even our enemies show us how to awaken if we recognize the truth. So you can be vulnerable by being centered in the truth that vulnerability is our natural state because we have nothing to fear. We have nothing. We're here, like Bonnie said at the first of this month, to experience joy. We're here to play. We're here to do the hokey pokey. And why not? So I encourage you this week as it comes up, be brave, be courageous, and be lovingly vulnerable. And so it is. Thank you.